right. Well, we are very honored today to have Chairman of the Swinomish Indian Committee, Brian Cladoosby, with us. You've met Brian a little bit. I've known Brian for
21 years, 22 years?
22 years.
21 years.
21 years. He's not only the chairman of his own community, chair of the tribal government, the head of state, but is also, as I mentioned, the immediate past president of the National Congress of American Indians, which is the national organization of tribes that works on everything from tax bills to other issues of national concern. And when we invite people like Brian to talk, I say, don't do a big speech. Actually, just tell people what you do. Because the idea here is to give you guys some sense of what real life is like, what the challenges are.
So what I'm going to do is a big speech and tell you what I do.
Big speech and tell them what you do. All right? All yours.
Alrighty. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I like responses. I'm from Swinomish. Anybody ever been to Swinomish? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands up. Right. We're about an hour north of Seattle.
Brian?
Yes.
The mic isn't on.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's my fault. Just.
It's on.
Come on.
We can turn it up over here.
So I've been there all my life. I am 58 years old, be 59 on my next birthday. So I've got 3 priorities in life: God, family, community, and golf. Oh, that's 4. Any golfaholics in here? Yes. All right, a little bit about myself. Like I said, born and raised at Swinomish. My roots go very, very deep there. I've been there all my life, never lived any place ever, and don't ever have a desire to live any other place in the world. And I've got my dad's still alive, is 84. What's awesome about my dad is, so I've got 2 grandkids that are 10 and 5, and he's the great-grandfather of my grandchildren. So they call him Greats, Grandpa Greats. They just call him Greats. He's 84 years old. And so his Indian name is Kalt. So what's amazing about that is his great-grandfather was also Kalt. And his great-grandfather signed the Point Elliott Treaty for the Swinomish tribe in 1855. So when you put it in that perspective, my dad's got great-grandchildren, and his great-grandfather signed the treaty for us in 1855. So my grandkids are the 7th generation from the signing of the Point Elliott Treaty. So we got a beautiful wife who's been by my side 42 years now, and I got 2 beautiful daughters who will be 40 and 35 this year. And so very, very blessed, very blessed. And so I've been on my council, my tribal council, for 33 years now on tribal council. So I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of tribal council. So I've been the chairman for 21 years now. And so I've been only by the grace of God, the longest reigning chairman in the history of Swinomish. And my grandfather, he was also on council for about 24 years. So followed in my grandfather's footsteps. And I think it skips a generation most of the time because the kids see what it's like to have your parents on council. They're like, don't want none of that. So I know my 2 daughters have no desire to be on council, but I'm grooming 2 of my grandkids to follow in my footsteps. And so my goal as a tribal leader is very simple. And, you know, just to step back a bit, 21 years ago when I became chair, Joe Kalt, Steve Cornell, and Manly Begay ran a tribal leadership conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico that I attended, and it basically set a big part of the foundation of how I lead my people. So, and we went full circle, and a few years ago I got to go back and speak as a leader at that. And so just by way of how Joe and I have been together for a long time. But my goal is really easy as a tribal leader. All I want to do is destroy historical trauma, one generation at a time. That's my goal, to destroy historical trauma. I got letters, and of course the genesis, and we've been dealing with historical trauma in Indian country ever since the white man came into our part of the country. And probably one of the biggest policies that hurt Swinomish and a lot of tribes in the Northwest was your boarding school experience. Last year. So my grandfather was born in 1899. And so he was a product of the boarding school experience. There's a saying that says, you are a product of your upbringing. You are a product of your upbringing. And so my grandfather, at a very, very young age, 6 or 8 years old, was sent to a boarding school. And when you go to boarding schools, going home sometimes is not an option. And we finally found a letter, my historian did. And it was in 1919 when my grandfather was 20 years old. And he was still a prisoner of war of the boarding school experience at 20. He was in Oregon, long ways from Swinomish. And in 1919, he made the decision, I had enough of this. And he ran away. And in 1919, how my grandfather figured out how he was going to get from Oregon to Swinomish is beyond me, but he headed that way. And he made it to Seattle. And in 1919, instead of going back to the boarding school, and we have the letter from the head of the person running the boarding school. It says, Ernest Cladoosby ran away. We know he's heading to LaConner. If you apprehend him, call us. We'll come and get him and bring him back. He was AWOL. It was an APB, All Points Bulletin. If you find this guy, let us know. We're going to bring him back. In 1919, he made it to Seattle. And he made it to a Navy recruiting station. And he went in and he joined the Navy. The school, we got the next letter from the school saying, incorrigible Ernest Cladoosby, we heard, has joined the Navy. Maybe you can turn him into a man. And we have the letters. And it was a tug of war between the boarding school and the military. The boarding school in their letter said to the military, is still our property. And so the military, I don't know what they were thinking, says okay, and they brought him back to Portland, or to Oregon, to the boarding school for about a week, and we no idea what they did to him as a runaway. And so the military finally figured out, wait, he's our property now. And so they went and they took him from the boarding school in 1919, and they brought him to California for boot camp. So that was the end of my grandfather's boarding school experience. You think. The verbal abuse, the mental abuse, the physical abuse, and the sexual abuse that he endured at this school was unspeakable. And that was across the spectrum for all of our kids that attended these boarding schools. They suffered a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Their soul was like ripped out of them. It was destroyed, damaged. They lost that connection with their people. They lost that connection with their language. They lost that connection with their culture, the storytelling, all of that. And so they brought back this trauma to the reservation. And so when you deal with historical trauma and when you deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, the two things you need, one, medication, two, a professional to help you deal with it. Neither of those were available in our communities. And so the drug that our grandparents turned to, alcohol. And so you see the statistic, we have the highest rate of alcoholism than any segment of society in the U.S., drug and alcohol abuse. And so we are plagued at Swinomish with that. It's generational. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, he died when I was 4 years old. The only memory I have of my great-grandfather was seeing him sitting in that chair that morning dead with a bottle of alcohol between his legs. My grandfather, alcoholic. My father, alcoholic. I started drinking at a very, very young age. And so, to come full circle here now to destroying historical trauma, they say it takes 2 generations to break a cycle. 2 generations. My grandfather's language was beaten out of him. He was not able to teach my mom that language. In turn, she was not able to teach me. So there's 2 generations there that broke a cycle. The storytelling, the drumming, the songs, all those things was not handed down. 2 generations. And so, right now, so my dad quit drinking in 1976. I quit drinking in 1989. Neither of my 2 daughters do drugs or alcohol. And for the first time in 100 years in our family, first time in 100 years, I've got a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old being raised in a home that is 100% drug and alcohol free. That usually gets a hand. That is destroying historical trauma, 1 generation at a time. And it's ironic that from our perspective, from the Swinomish perspective, the one thing that caused historical trauma, boarding school education, the one thing that we are using to destroy historical trauma 1 generation at a time, education. Education. So get this. Swinomish, small community, about 1,000 members. We made a commitment to destroying historical trauma through education by providing full ride scholarships to the school of your choice anywhere in the world. Anywhere. We're a small tribe. We don't have a big casino, but we've made this commitment. And right now, we probably have 80 students getting some form of higher education at Swinomish. Anybody from Arizona? We have 4 kids. So part of our leadership program through NCAI, our kids got to go visit Arizona, and they fell in love with ASU, and so we have 3 freshmen and a girl getting her master's degree at ASU right now. We had one thinking, I want to go to Northern Arizona University, so they went to NAU. We have kids at Western, we have kids at Western Washington University, we have kids at University of Washington, we have kids at Gonzaga, we have kids at Seattle U. One of our Seattle U girls just graduated and she's in Australia now doing something with that over there. We had one of our elders go do a Maori. The Maoris have a very nice university over there, and so one of our girls wanted to get her PhD over there, so why not, right? So it is working. But it's going to take 2 generations to break that cycle. And so when I like to use this story, are there any questions? Let's break for a question. I like questions. All right. Oh, yes.
How did you go back and get that culture that was lost?
It's still a struggle. We're still working on all of that. We have linguists. The linguists are very, very... What's very important is culture, language, borders. Those are 3 things that are very, very important. In culture, we're working really, really hard to bring back the singing, the songs, the dancing, but it's tough. It's tough.
I have a question about the scholarships and financial aid to universities. Is there sort of a implicit or explicit expectation that they come back to and sort of stay, or is there anything attached to?
So we're called the Swinomish Indian Tribal Community. We're not Swinomish Indian Nation. One of our elder says, I don't want to be known as the SIN tribe. True story. We had someone thinking about that. We need to be known as a nation. He says, no. Don't like the acronym. And so we're Swinomish Indian tribal community, and what's unique about Swinomish, nobody leaves. It's very, 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 very rare that anybody leaves our community. When they do leave to go to school, they come back. It's just something that's ingrained in us. That, yeah, it's very, very, the families that are still in the urban settings from Swinomish were part of the relocation program in the 50s, where they were taking our men and families and moving them into the urban settings. And so, yeah, it's very weird. There's no expectation on them to come home. I mean, we don't say that you must come home and work for us. We know they're going to come home. That's just the way it is.
I know some of the schools I've worked with before that had scholarship programs struggled to get kids interested in going to college. So did you have any programs or expectations before to build up that interest in the scholarship in going to college?
Just using, we started a birth to 6 program about a generation ago, about 20 years ago. And so our goal on that birth to 6 program was to start that early learning as young as possible, because kids are just sponges. If you've ever been around a kid at 0, 1, 2, they're just an amazing, they're sponges. Yeah, but we knew that wasn't going to be the issue. The issue was going to be trying to get the parents into that setting with their kids. So the parents would take an ownership of their kids at a very young age. And our first class from that birth to 6 was one of the highest graduating classes that we ever seen at Swinomish. And now we're enjoying anywhere from 80 to 100% every year graduation rate. So it wasn't the kids, that wasn't the problem. It was the parents breaking that cycle, and the parents thinking that, in 1994, I worked in the special ed program at LaConner. And one of my tribal members said, the goal for my daughter is to get her out of the 8th grade. That was the thinking. We had to break that mentality, break that cycle that, no, not 8th grade, no, not 12th grade, no, not 4-year, no, not that. PhD, think high, think high. And so it's been working. If you looked at the statistics over the years, Swinomish had the lowest test scores of any kids heading into the LaConner School District. Now our kids are tested at the highest level in the whole county of all kids entering public school in Skagit County. And we didn't spare any expenses. We hired the best teachers, the best professionals that we could to work with our kids at a very young age. Investment. And I look at it as an investment. I don't look at it as a drain on our budget. I don't think that, oh my goodness, we're going to have almost 100 kids going to college this year. You know how much that's going to cost us? I say, no, leaders. How much is it going to save us? In one generation, I had a 37-year-old mom of 5. A product of historical trauma. She was abused at a very young age. She did not get the help she needed. At a very young age, she turned to drugs and alcohol. She continued to be abused as a teenager. Over the next 10 years, she had 5 kids. She was a deadbeat mom because of her drug and alcohol abuse, and she was not able to raise those kids. Those kids were sent to foster care or other family members. By 37, she was on her deathbed because of drug and alcohol abuse. Her mom was there, her grandma was there, her kids were there, her siblings was there, her aunts and uncles, her nieces and nephews. We were all there for 3 weeks in ICU watching her die. On Christmas, 3 years ago, she died. Very, very sad. That same year, we had a mom, a dad, and a daughter walk into our council chambers like this. This is how we say thank you. We say thank you to those in front of us, and we say thank you to the Creator. We raise our hands. This is our universal sign for thank you. This is how we do it. That mom and dad and that 21-year-old girl walked in to our council chambers like this because we had invested $150,000 in her life for her to get a degree at the University of Washington. Can you imagine how much we spent in 3 weeks on that girl in ICU? You think it would have been more than $150,000? Investment. It's an investment. That girl that walked across that stage at the University of Washington and got her degree, immediately she came home and got a good paying job with Swinomish. Immediately. Productive tax paying member of society. She will never be in a court system unless she gets a speeding ticket. She'll never be in jail. She'll never be a drug dealer. She'll never be a drug addict. She'll never be on welfare. She'll never be on food stamps. She'll never be in a county jail, a state jail, or a federal prison. So when you add up how much money was spent on a person who was not a productive member of society compared, you can see it's an investment. It's an investment. And we're going to save the tribe dollars, we're going to save the local government dollars, the county dollars, the feds dollars because of that investment. And I tell this to politicians in DC, you give me $1 to educate my kids today and I will save you 20 in a generation. They don't get it. Their thinking is only today. They don't think of the long term. But education is the key. And we're going to keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. I could talk all day, so
That's okay. Keep going.
cut me off when you have to. I just want to talk a little bit about local, county, state, and federal politics. And my life is 100% politics. That's my life. I just deal with politicians at every single level. And so we have incorporated all of the different political systems that you have here in the United States. We are, from a conservative standpoint, we have to be fiscally responsible. We have to have money in our checkbook. We cannot spend more than we have. We have to be fiscally conservative. You know, the wedge issues, gays, God, guns, you know, that is just like, that is straw man. You know, people who base their politics on that are very shallow in their thinking. And so, you know, so we've incorporated the conservative values, we've incorporated the liberal values. You know, we're very, very strong environmentalists. We're very, very socially responsible from cradle to grave for our tribal members. And so we've adopted, you know, probably every single tribal member just about in our reservation has a gun. So we love hunting. We're hunters. You know, we're gatherers. And so we're a strong believer in the Second Amendment. But we're also strong believers in taking care of the poor. We're strong believers in making sure that no one's left behind. You know, so we have some of the conservative values, we have some of the liberal values, and we have communistic values. People like, really? Yeah, we're communists. Nothing wrong with being communist socialists, all right? We have to adopt, if you adopt one form of government, you're going to fail. Communism failed for one reason. And I have a firm belief that capitalism has a point where it just can't expand anymore. And so, you know, we have government-run health clinics, government-run dental clinics, we have government-run casinos, we have government-run golf courses, we have government-run gas stations. So that's kind of like the socialistic, communistic view. So we've kind of like adopted all of those different U.S. world views on politics. And so we jokingly say that, you know, and I tell this to tribal leaders, you know, we belong to the I party. We have to belong to the I party. And of course you think of what? Independence, right? Yeah. Give him some more sugar. Ron Allen says, I belong to the Indian party. The I party, the Indian party. Our politics is real simple. You support us, we support you. Real simple. I've got great Democrat friends. I've got great Republican friends. I've got great independent friends. I've got enemies in the Democratic Party. I've got enemies in the Republican Party. And there's not enough independents to call them enemies. They usually work with us. But we have come a long way politically, and I jokingly told them back there that, you know, Joe, you're talking about being at the table. You know, I told them, I says, we were never at the table, we were usually on the menu. It's different now, we're at the table. You know, locally, we have multiple issues at all levels of government. We've got taxes is an issue, water is an issue, fish, DHAT, culverts, and of course the Great Wolf Lodge. So all these things impacted us. Joe talked about the Great Wolf Lodge decision. Taxes, taxes, taxes. Probably not a lot of you remember Slade Gordon. Slade Gordon.
I remember.
He was like one of the biggest anti-Indian fighters in the U.S. Senate. He was, haven't you heard of the Bolt decision?
Yeah.
Bolt decision? So Slade Gordon fought the Bolt decision in Washington State. So in a nutshell, in 1855, when my dad's great-grandfather signed the treaty, it guaranteed us a right to always have salmon. And we are salmon people. We live on an island. And so immediately, within 20 or 30 years, once again, another broken promise where the state in 1889 became a state and thought in their infinite wisdom they had to manage all the salmon. So from about 1889 until 1974, it was a constant fight for tribes to have access to their salmon, which was promised in the treaties. In 1974, Judge Bolt ruled in federal court that the tribes have a guaranteed access to up to 50% of all the salmon in the state of Washington. So we're talking less than 2% of the population getting guaranteed 50%. And that was his interpretation of the Point Elliott Treaty. And so Slade Gordon lost that fight, and he appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled in our favor that yes, you have a treaty right to salmon. And so Slade Gordon was a big Indian fighter for us, and how I got on Slade Gordon, I have no idea. Sometimes. But, oh yeah, we're talking about the Great Wolf Lodge decision. And so in Thurston County, there was a very anti-Indian, I believe the term might be auditor for the county, who does all the tax assessment stuff. And so in Indian country, if you have trust property and you want to do a development with somebody off reservation, in order for that to be tax effective for you and them, you have to own at least 51% of that. You guys know that, right? Some of you? So 51% of the ownership has to be in tribal hands. So that's the way the Great Wolf Lodge corporation was set up. So the tribe had 51% ownership, the outside investors 49%. The assessor in his infinite wisdom said 51% still was not enough. They owned too much ownership of it. So he started taxing that business. And it went through the court system. And something very unexpected happened in that court decision where the judge ruled that not only was that business tax exempt, but he also ruled that any business or any home or any dwelling on a reservation in trust cannot be taxed by the county. That was huge. That was huge. And so there's 29 tribes in the state of Washington. What tribe in the state of Washington was losing more tax money than any other tribe before this ruling? Swinomish. We were shocked. We were shocked that to find out. So over a 3-year period, the county was taking $6 million of tax revenue off of our reservation on trust land that was lived on by non-Indians. Tulalip was number 2. Tulalip lost about $5.5 million in a 3-year period. And so when this court case came down and there was $6 million hanging out there, this was really low-hanging fruit. I mean, really low-hanging fruit. So this is what the judge also ruled. He said, over the last 3 years, anybody at Swinomish that paid any part of that $6 million can get a refund of that $6 million. And so we're talking a school district who had the majority of that money, almost half of it, fire district, Medic 1, those are the 3 big ones. If they had to pull out of their budget right there then and refund all their taxpayers, 2 of those 3 would have went bankrupt because of that. And so the county, they took 1,000 taxpayers off the rolls and they said, if you want $6 million back, you got to ask for it. So Swinomish really, really quick had to make a decision. 3 decisions. Do nothing. Let the school and the fire district go bankrupt. Number 2, we take the $6 million. Or number 3, pass an ordinance that says if you want your $6 million back, you're going to pay a very, very hefty fine to the Swinomish tribe for it. We had $6 million right in front of us that we could have took just like that. And $6 million is a lot of money. It's almost half of our casino revenues for an entire year. And so we chose option 3. We wanted to make sure the school stayed whole. We wanted to make sure the fire district stayed whole. We wanted to make sure Medic 1 stayed whole, the library district, and there was a couple others. There's like 6 taxing organizations. And so we chose option 3. You know how many people asked for a rebate and wanted to pay that large fee? 0. 0. You know how much credit we got for doing that? 0. The anti-Indian letters in Skagit County. So Skagit, the Western Washington is very unique. It's usually all blue. Western Washington. There's only one county that's red. Guess which county is red? Yeah. And so we had to, another thing we had to do real quick, because this year was tax time. The first 6-month payment was due. And so there was no responsible government in the area to be able to collect those taxes. So we had to make another decision. Do nothing, collect the taxes and keep the money, or collect the taxes and give it to the taxing districts. What decision did we make? Collect the taxes and give it to the taxing district. So in short order, we had to come up with an IRS, Indian Revenue Service. I can't take credit for that. One of my councilmen came up with that one. We thought it was pretty good. And so in short order, we had to set up an ordinance. We had to set up all the mechanisms for collecting it and distributing it in just short order. And just like overnight, we did that. It was very amazing. And thank God the county for the first year worked with us and let us use their numbers on those assessments. So for 1 year, they allowed us to do that. And so in the last 3 years, we've been collecting taxes from non-Indians on Swinomish, and we still have, if you know any anti-Indian organizations, CIRA is one of the biggest ones, Citizens something Rights Association. But a couple of their board members live on Swinomish and lease land from us. They're like national anti-Indian figures that live on Swinomish and lease land from us. Why they do that, we don't know. I don't know the mentality. I don't know the thought process. But the county was about 89 to 92% collection rate when they were collecting taxes on Swinomish. We're 99%.
Hey.
99% collection rate the last 3 years collecting these taxes. So That's a Great Wolf Lodge. Second question. I'm watching my time over there. Questions? Hey, you just want to listen? Well, I'll talk.
I can start one. I do have a question.
Yes.
I was reading a lot of those news articles when that taxation issue was coming up, and how the anti-Indian movement was really trying to say these Indians are going to steal the money, and you're going to lose the school, you're going to lose the emergency response system, you're going to lose the library in town, everything's going to be gone, and they're just going to put it back into Indian resources. But that wasn't the case, and I saw the nation putting out this very transparent process. Hey, this is how it's going to happen, and laying out the information to sort of educate the non-natives about what was going on. Can you speak to how transparency has been a big part of Swinomish's operations, and how your government communicates with other governmental entities?
So how we got to the point where we had so much tax money leaving the reservation is in 1968, our elders signed a lease for a big housing development of almost 900 homes on Swinomish. And so that's where the majority of the tax money comes, the 900 non-Indian homes at Swinomish on 400 acres of leased land, a 75-year lease that is up in 2044. And so what we did was we, of course, put everything out there, all the numbers, everything collected. It's on a website, you can see it. But we also went a step further in creating a board in this housing development to work with us on looking at the income and the distribution of these taxes. And so it's a very transparent process, and you're right, the sky is falling, the Indians are gonna tax us out of this world, our tax rates are going to go through the roof, and it was like doomsday. Oh no, the world's ending. But it has worked. The school, we went a step further, and we bought a school bus this year. We bought a new ambulance for the fire district that says Swinomish Indian Tribal Community across it, and we've given more than we've had to over the years, so it's been working out real good. And there's only a few vocal minority that still write to the paper saying that it's a big ripoff, and thank God it's just a vocal minority. The majority of the people see the benefit of what we're doing. Anybody know so let me talk a little bit about national politics. And so, like Joe said, I've been the president of the National Congress of American Indians the last 4 years. NCAI is the largest and oldest Indian organization in the U.S., and I was very blessed to have been able to, the last 4 years, work with the greatest administration in the history of U.S. politics towards Native Americans, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, President Obama has done more for Indian country, I believe, since Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon started a lot of the Indian self-determination policies, and so Clinton did some work with us, but Obama just took it to the next level. I personally met with him 8 times over the last 8 years. I was one of 12 tribal leaders that was able to go meet with him early in his administration. And as one of the 12 leaders with the president, I was chosen to co-chair that meeting with the president in the United States, unheard of. And he made it very clear on the campaign trail that you're coming through the front door. We're not sneaking you in the back door. You're coming in the front door. And this guy just transformed the way that the government should work with tribes as First Nations. And, I not only give him credit, but I give the Senate and the House credit too for them following his lead. For example, we had what was called the General Welfare Exclusion Act that was just passed. Basically, in a nutshell, tribes get to determine their welfare programs for their tribal members. The IRS was reaching into Indian country like you wouldn't believe. We would have a tribal gathering, and we would pay our spiritual leaders for doing some work. 1099. we would have an elders gathering and give away some gifts less than $100, $10.99. We would hire somebody to barbecue our salmon, and we would give them a little something on the side, $10.99. So the IRS was just $10.99ing us to death. And so we said, look, every government has welfare programs that aren't taxed. We are the same. And so we got the General Welfare Exclusion Act passed, and what was very awesome about that is that we got 100% of every Democrat and Republican in the House, 100% of every Democrat and Republican in the Senate, and we got the president to sign it. That's bipartisan. And we like to let people know, our issues are, bipartisan. And so him taking the lead, working with us, we've seen access, we've seen increases in our budget, and it was just a great run. It was a great run. Only time will tell how this president and his policies towards tribes will play out. We had a meeting scheduled with him at the end of the year, an all tribal leaders meeting like President Obama had with us. It fell through. Why, we don't know. But we will see how, going forward, how working with this administration, and we are very, very concerned about, the environmental issues, that climate change, global warming, and I tell these Republicans who have their head in the sand when it comes to global warming and climate change, I tell them, look, we are being impacted, and Alaska, for the first time their villages are falling into the Arctic. The Louisiana tribes are being impacted. The Florida tribes are being impacted. I was at a climate change conference in Hawaii. Anybody know where Tuvalu is? Tuvalu? So Tuvalu is one of the smallest nations in the world. Pacific Islanders. And it just burned in my brain. A grandfather with his two grandsons standing in the Pacific Ocean. He was holding their hands like this. And the water was up to here to the grandkids. And he was standing in their tribal cemetery at Tuvalu. For the first time in their history, their cemetery was underwater. And he was a real native comedian joker. You meet those off the res, kind of like Indians that just like everything is humorous. And he said, well, at least our elders get a bath 2 times a day. Yeah, but so I tell these Republicans in D.C., look, I want you to have a hearing this year for us. Please have a hearing. I says, we don't want to come here to D.C. to debate what's causing climate change and global warming. That's not our objective. Our objective is to come here for you to hold a hearing, maybe like environmental impacts to Indigenous communities. Let's have a hearing that says environmental impacts to Indigenous communities. We're not going to sit up here and say that we have too much CO2s, we have too much pollution. That's not our objective. Our objective is to come here and let you hear our stories about what's happening in our communities. We have a small island at Swinomish. And we fish on this island, and for the first time in history, that island was covered with water. I had to take pictures of it. Just right around the corner, another community of homes was flooded out. For the first time in history, that community was underwater. And so we tell them, look, we want to share these stories with you. You're our trustee. You help us come up with a solution to help mitigate these problems that are happening in our communities. And so, it won't go anywhere. They don't want to touch climate change or global warming with a 10-foot pole. And any hearings that have anything to do with impacts, they're staying away from it. So I'll keep pushing, I'll keep trying, and I'll keep advocating that they hear our story, because it's an important story. Questions?
I have a question relating, just kind of generally, but relating back to the scholarship. When you have issues like that, what seems to be a common occurrence in government is that despite something in the long run would save money overall, it's not saving, if it's not saving money to the same part of government, they don't care as much as they care about, you know, if I'm the state's Medicaid program, I care about the state's Medicaid budget, not the overall Medicaid budget, et cetera. And while you guys are footing this large bill, and you talked about a lot of the areas that it would save, a lot of those savings are, like you said, federal, state dollars, whether it's healthcare or, you know, whether that's Medicaid dollars or IHS dollars or whatever, or education or, you know, prison dollars or whatever. Have you had any success leveraging those other tiers of government to invest in these savings, or are you guys just, it sounds like in that instance you guys are footing the bill and they're just reaping the benefits?
We're footing the bill and they're reaping the benefits.
And is there any instance where you've been able to leverage in any way to?
We try. We try our hardest to get, once again, you know, he might be a senator pretty soon. His Congressman Rokita from Indiana. He's a really good guy. He's a Republican, and you know, he told me I can't go back to my district and advocate for socialism, advocate for free college for everybody. And he says, "Can you imagine the impacts on our budget?" So it's a tough sell because everybody looks at it as today's dollars. It's a really tough sell. From a tribal perspective, you know, our jail costs are out of this world. We have to pay those jail costs out of our budget. You know, our health care, our prescription drug costs are just skyrocketing. You know, our social programs. So we just look at it from, okay, we're going to help you guys out and save you money, but we're going to save us money too. And so, I don't know, over time maybe they'll get it. But it'll just take a mindset.
So I have a question about the scope of work and representation of the National First American Indians. So we have a similar group in Canada, Assembly of First Nations, and they've been struggling, I think, in the last few years in terms of being seen as representative of the community, largely because of higher rates of urbanization and half of our communities under 30. So I'm curious with the NCAI, sort of who you represent, who you not represent, what's the scope of the work and focus of the organization?
And the Grand Chief Bellegarde was just at a conference in October and spoke to us. And they're going through a nice period now with their new president up there who is recognizing First Nations more and more and going and speaking with them. In fact, when President, is he a president? Prime Minister Trudeau was elected, 2 of the First Nations representatives were at our conference. And the Monday they spoke to us saying, "Pray for us for a victory tomorrow." And tomorrow came and they won. So, but you know, NCAI, it's a large organization and it's grown by leaps and bounds. We represent every federally recognized tribe and state recognized tribe in the U.S. And so, as the president of NCAI, I would always make sure to let people know I don't speak for any tribe but Swinomish. Very important. I don't speak for any tribe, but I advocate for 567 nations and state recognized tribes. So that's who I would considered who my service population area was all tribes, because not all tribes belong to NCAA, but all tribes benefit from the work that we do in Washington, D.C. And so it's not about being part of the bigger picture, but hopefully getting, seeing some rewards at the end of the tunnel.
Can you talk about what you see as maybe like the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 issues that American Indians are going to face or could benefit or see from in the next couple of years? Because I know they scatter all the way range from tertiary fix to environment to gaming to healthcare. But what you see is out of that, kind of culling that down to maybe the top 5.
Once again, like I told you, you know, tops for me is destroying historical trauma, for me personally. And that is my, you know, improving on these slides in the next 10 years that Joe showed you earlier, where we have that continual rise in the dropout rate. That's got to be first and foremost education. I will always put education at the top, and I will always be a strong advocate for education, because there's so much that comes with it. And you read the statistics, you know, an educated person is more likely to be a productive member of society, more likely to. And so, you know, if we have educated tribal members, that'll start solving a lot of our problems with drug and alcohol abuse. I use my family as an example. You know, there was 5 of us boys and 1 girl. You know, none of us are druggies or alcoholics now. You know, it's breaking that cycle. So, you know, education, and my mom made sure all of us graduated, which was very important. So education, with that is the domino of destroying drug and alcohol abuse. With that is destroying the dropout rate, the unemployment rate, and it just opens a whole host of doors. But drug and alcohol abuse, you know, is right under education, and tackling that is tough. And once again, a lot of generational issues and a lot of PTSD and a lot of things handed down. And so opioid, that's become a big issue for us right now. The heroin crisis. We've never ever had a heroin problem ever at Swinomish. 4 years ago we had an 18-year-old become our first death from a heroin overdose. So 4 years ago we started a This Has to Stop program. And in 4 years we saved almost 50 tribal members' lives. And once again, getting back to your point, we couldn't wait for the federal government to come in. We invested $750,000 into this program in year 1 to get this started. And in 4 years we saved 50 tribal members' lives who are now off heroin. So we took it a step further. We said, what are we doing different? Why is our program successful? And how can we use this model for the bigger community? November 15th, once again, not waiting for the federal government, the state government, or the county government, we took action and opened up a multi-million-dollar heroin treatment center, the largest in a 5-county area in Western Washington. Taken the initiative.